Welcome everybody to today's session of Turn on Federalism. My name is Stefan Burkhardt and I'm the head of Division South-Southeast Asia at the Institute of International Cooperation of the Untitled Foundation. Our session today will focus on the federalism debate in the Philippines. Please allow me to say a few words about Turn on Federalism and about today's session before I hand over to our speaker. Turn on Federalism is a cooperation between the Untitled Foundation and 50 Shades of Federalism. The Untitled Foundation is a German political foundation with a mandate of the German Federal Parliament. Our core task is to promote and support democracy and the rule of law within Germany, especially through civic education in Bavaria, but also through worldwide activities in more than 60 partner countries. 50 Shades of Federalism is a project established in 2017 by Søren Kyle and Paul Anderson. The project publishes short papers on different aspects and discussion on federalism. Our online series, Turn on Federalism, aims to discuss the 50 Shades of Federalism papers to engage with experts, politicians, and civil society actors around the world in order to look at the possibilities of federalism, its different shades, and also its country-based evolutions. The idea is to create a network of cooperation and exchange. For further information, you can also visit our website, where you can find videos and summaries of the previous events. Our session today focuses on the federalism discourse in the Philippines and the quest for genuine local autonomy. The federalism debate gained some momentum under the current president, but looking at the upcoming elections, it is not a big deal in the debate. So we will see what the future will bring and how Alex Brillantes looks at this non-debate. As you may know, the HSF informs about current developments in the federalism and decentralization debate at the Philippines as well. Right next week, we will look at the Mandanas-Garcia ruling and its consequences, especially for the LGUs. Find the invitations on the Facebook or Twitter account of HSF Philippines. As I have already raised some questions, we will discuss, among others, what are the characteristics of the federalism debate in the Philippines? What have been major obstacles in the way of deeper federal reforms in the country? And how can federalism and decentralization reforms enter the political discourse again and start a genuine process of reform? We are very pleased to welcome our speaker, Alex Brillantes. He is professor and former dean of the National College of Public Administration and Governance of the University of the Philippines. Alex, we are happy that you could join us today. The event will be moderated by Thea Bechler. She's a scientific researcher at the Institute of Federalism at the University of Freiburg. If you have any questions or comments, please use the Q&A box. We will collect your questions and pass them on to our speaker. Thank you very much for joining us. I hope you will enjoy today's presentation. And now, please let me hand over to Alex Brillantes. Alex, the word is yours.
Thank you very much, Stefan, for the honor of being part of this, and of course to Thea, Soren, and the team. Let me now start my presentation. I know I have to, I have about 20 minutes, yeah? So let me just continue. Okay, so dear friends, as you pointed out, if it is now clear, as you pointed out, Stefan, in your introduction, you mentioned already about the Mandanas decision. All I'm saying, dear friends, but maybe I'm going ahead of myself. All I'm saying is that the federalism debate in the Philippines should be located within a very, very important point. We're talking about decentralization, devolution. And the discussion on devolution and decentralization has been here for some time now. When people talk about federalism, they say, is that something new? No, for the longest time, I said, it's not new because we have to locate it within the context of decentralization and devolution, because at the end of the day, it's all about empowerment. It's all about people participation. As I mentioned, recent debates, as you mentioned, Stefan, about this, it's very, very alive now because we just had the Supreme Court decision that decided in favor of local governments, very massive amounts of financial resources shall be transferred to the local governments. But the jury is still out whether or not this will really work out. But equally important, it has once more put into fore this whole discourse on decentralization. And of course, we are about to celebrate our local government code. Actually, the 30th anniversary. We have had the local government in 1992, and we're celebrating its 30th anniversary. And many of us in the Philippines have been quite involved. I'm sure many of us around the room are here. And of course, the devolution, we called it at one point, it has started some kind of a quiet revolution in the countryside because it really transferred massive powers and authorities to local governments, health services, agriculture, social services, but not education. I made a mistake there. But number two, regulatory functions to local governments. So apart from deliver basic services, we have regulatory services, but equally important, financial resources to the local governments. And this is very important, it created an enabling framework for people participation in local governments. Point, dear friends, the enabling framework is there. 1992, but even before that, we've already been talking about decentralization, devolution for some time, as I'll discuss in a while. So it has to be, so our topic today is 50 Shades of Federalism. I'm very happy to be part of this project, right? And we have had a number of publications. Really, congratulations on this very important initiative. And I'm really grateful to the Hans Seidel and to Carol and our colleagues, Soren, for this opportunity. So we have to therefore locate it within the context of devolution. It is not new. I've said that a number of times. In the Philippines, when I would do some discussions, I would say, hindi po ito bago. Hindi ito bago. It's not new if you put it within the context of decentralization and devolution, which is what federalism is all about. At least within the Philippine context, people participation, empowerment. Number two, and that will bring about quote unquote development. But number two, federalism has also to be located within the context of the conflict in Mindanao. When we talk about this conflict in Mindanao, and Senator Pimentel, who of course is the primary author of the local government code, has mentioned this a number of times. And I was telling Thea earlier, Senator Pimentel and a number of local officials, we traveled. We had the opportunity to also bring a number of people to your institute in Freeburg to talk about, learn about federalism. So it's two things: federalism as a means for development, and federalism to settle the conflict in Mindanao, but based on decentralization and devolution. And in the Philippines, we have a number of books that have been published. As I was telling our colleagues around the table, many of the books behind me are on federalism. And equally important, when the president became, our current president was elected, he put federalism as part of his agenda because it is and continues to be centered in the platform of PDP Laban, the party that has included federalism in its platform. However, Duterte ran under that party, but recently it has taken the back burner for some reasons of their own that we can discuss later on. That's why, in one sense, federalism was really in the front burner, but it has been in the back burner for a while because it has encountered some kind of quote-unquote political concerns. But in spite of that, it continues to be a very, very relevant concern. In deepening devolution, as I mentioned earlier, it's very important that we have to learn from the past 30 years, 25 years, 30 years of the local government code. And the ultimate target is for federalism. It is to deepen decentralization. And in the Philippines, at least in our case as an academic, we came up with what I call a stylized continuum relating where federalism is within the context of decentralization, devolution. Deconcentration, administrative decentralization. And then it moves to devolution, local governments. It moves to regional governments, this third part. And in the Philippines today, we have a regional government in Mindanao. And we say, in a number of conferences, we say, we believe that it is the next logical step to federalism. In fact, we published a book here on federalism. And in this book, we said, it's the next logical step to federalism is the next logical step to devolution. Because if we're not careful, guys, we're going to have some separation. That's something that we can talk about. Point, dear friends, it is a politico-administrative remedy to address this burning issue of the clamor for development. Because let's face it, there were and continue to be some elements in the Philippines that actually wanted to separate, okay? And we say, no, there's a political administrative remedy, and that is regionalism. And that's also federalism. Okay. And of course, we talk about separation. So this is just a stylized continuum. So it is really hand in glove in terms of decentralization, local autonomy, federalism, because it's even included in our constitution. Local autonomy is a fundamental principle of the state. And we talk about decentralization as a means to improve public sector governance, improve people participation, and of course, dispersion of economic development, because in our country, it's an archipelagic country, and not all are equal. You know, we also have this term here that most development is concentrated in Imperial Manila, and that is really what decentralization devolution is all about. That not all resources should be concentrated in Imperial Manila. It should be concentrated or diffused. And how do you do that? You do it through decentralization. You do it through devolution, and you push it further through the process of federalism. So if you look at it in the context, hindi bago, federalism is not new in the Philippines. Okay. However, I don't want to romanticize it. Well, we had 1992, the local government code, and over the past 30 years, we have had a lot of successes and failures. But you know, for me, it's like looking at the glass that's half full and half empty. You know, and it's half full. Sure, there were some problems. We talk about, but it has provided a decisive power shift to provide voice and exit and accountability. But it cannot really be said a total success nor a total failure. I mean, if you look at it within the context of history, it is really part of the evolutionary process of our politico-administrative system. Among other problems, you talk about coordination among different levels of government is weak. I just attended the CEPA, it's called CEPA, Committee of Experts for Public Administration in UN, of course, virtually, because we've been attending that, but this time virtually. And one thing that they continue to talk about, even at the UN, at the level of the CEPA, Committee of Experts for Public Administration, they talk about the importance of vertical and horizontal coordination. So it really continues to be a public administration concern. And of course, the strong requirements for strong coordination are lacking. Clear division of responsibilities, we'll talk about it momentarily. Who is responsible for what, which is key in the discussion of federalism. And equally important, we talk about a system that is highly fragmented. However, over the past years, we've been conducting what we call a rapid field appraisal with the support of international institutions, rapid field appraisals, wherein we evaluate the state of decentralization devolution over the past so many years. And in fact, even as we speak, we're conducting one at this moment. As I said, there have been some gains. No? Sure, it's not a total success, it's not a total failure, but we have a program called Galing Po, a program that really documents good and best practices at the local level. And looking at the good and best practices, we've seen that, hey, it's not so bad. Because we have a hospital policy environment, the local government code, we have good leaders, especially many good local leaders have come out, frontline people, especially during the pandemic. We've seen that. Sometimes conflict between national and local, and sometimes local says, wait a minute, we are in charge, we're frontliners, you guys at the national level simply provide the framework and let us do the rowing and not the steering. Okay, but of course there's been conflict. And of course, sometimes if there's a crisis such as flood and even of course the pandemic, and of course another very important success factor is a proactive local government, a lot of dynamic local governments. We talk about very strong civil society and the response for demand for specific power can also be a trigger for success. This I'd like to point out, attendance in local and international training. I must publicly acknowledge the trainings and conferences that our colleagues in the Philippines, local officials have attended, not only in Germany, in Australia, in the US. And of course, Germany has also been in the forefront of this. We've sent a number of our local officials there, including of course Senator Pimentel, and of course to the Institute of Freiburg. Very important. Changing the mindsets, attending this training has also been a good source of innovations at the local level. Of course, we have many national programs and the role of universities and academic institutions, as I mentioned earlier, and of course, the role of bilateral institutions. Point, it's not a total success, definitely not a failure, but we have had good and best practices. But if you look at it from the perspective of evolution, it's not so bad because we have a lot of good and best practices in a program we call Galing Po. I'm very happy to be part of that. We initiated that when I was part of the Local Government Academy. My own experience in local governance was at one point I headed what's called the Local Government Academy, the training institution for local governments in the Philippines. In fact, I'm now a trustee of that institution. So over the past years, we did a study for the Asian Development Bank, sometime back with my friends, Jim and Gilbert Llanto. So the effects of decentralization since 1919 are positive. You have a local government code, strong leadership, improve access to financial resources, including now the very important Mandanas decision, people participation and talks about, well, there's some problems. What are the still inadequate local finance, weak national capacity, a problem that's really a fundamental concern, and of course, some next steps. What are the next steps? And part of the next steps, many next steps, deepen decentralization, build capacities. But guys, we're talking about the importance of the next logical step. Is it federalism? Is it next year or is it next decade? We don't know. But at one point, during the time of this Duterte administration, he constituted a consultative commission that wanted to really advocated the establishment of a federal structure of government. But it was really very much in the front burner at one point. But hey, the point is that it's very, very much part of the discussion of today as we speak. So we talk about the federalism as a development and reform strategy, as I mentioned, case of from decentralization, now federalism, we talk about it to build capacities. It provides innovation and flexibility at the local level. But I must mention, lest I be misunderstood, but I'm certainly aware of the fact that not all federal systems are highly devolved. And that came out again in the CEPA, the Committee of Experts meeting, Committee of Experts of Public Administration. But it's not necessarily guaranteed. But Philippine Philippine context, we believe that since if we do adopt the federal system, we will work on, build upon our experience over the past so many years, including the evolution. And hey, it might be right at this point in time, including, as I mentioned, development strategy, including, as I mentioned earlier, address the decades-long conflict in southern Philippines. Okay, so the timing might be good at this point in time. We don't know if the next administration will adopt it, but I'll point out later there are about 3 or 4 candidates who have been talking about actively decentralization. But the transition eventually to federalism, this might be an excellent opportunity for us to introduce the much needed reforms. As I said, our local government code, our law is not perfect, certainly not. But hey, if we do this, it might be an opportunity for us to introduce some reforms, including, among other things, what we call amalgamation. Let's face it, in my country, we have a number of subnational governments, and sometimes we have many local governments that are not viable. So we should talk about interlocal cooperation. We should talk about interlocal cooperation, and this was also supported by another German foundation. They talk about the importance of interlocal cooperation. We have many local governments, even at the barangay level, that are not viable, and that's something. So what we're suggesting, this might be an excellent opportunity. We have discussed this with our Minister of Local Government recently. Let's talk about biting the bullet. Can we talk about amalgamation? Okay, so it's also, as I mentioned earlier, a fundamental strategy to encourage people participation. As I mentioned earlier, it was introduced or given a lot of attention during the time of Senator Nene Pimentel. And problem, when we talk about federalism, very, very important, the importance of delineation of powers and authorities. We talk about concurrent functions, responsibilities, and powers. And this is what we've learned from other countries. From Germany, from Australia, even from Canada, etc. The importance of really having clear delineation functions. Because as you know, at the end of the day, it's all about power. Okay, but who, power for whom? Okay, it includes also not only it also includes fiscal and budgetary matters, transfer of financial transfers. But as I mentioned, the discussion of federalism is as old as the 1800s, as been articulated by our national hero, Jose Rizal. And of course, as I mentioned very recently, during the time of Senator Nene Pimentel, even with the President Duterte. Rizal, our national hero, talked about that. By a law of reaction, the islands will probably declare themselves some kind of a federal republic. And Rizal was our national hero. And of course, it's a picture of Senator Nene Pimentel, who was prime mover behind the federalism movement. So, point, the enabling policies for the evolution of federalism are there. Local government code, the Bangsa Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao, and the Mandanas-Garcia decision, wherein now the Supreme Court itself decided that, hey, over the past so many years, in spite of the fact that you have devolution, the transfers to local governments has not been enough. So we now talk about the NTAs, National Tax Allotment. So what are the major issues and concerns? I'll be done in a while. It talks about, okay, how do we design? And we've been talking about that. I have many books here about designing the federal system by Senator Pimentel, by Jose Abueva. So it's been there some time. How do we design it? In terms of what are the appropriate states, number of states, is it 3, is it 20, is it 15? The capital, where should it be? Where should it be, Manila or out of Metro Manila? Then we talk about delineating responsibilities. But a major issue and concern, as you know, is all about power. Continuing centralist tendencies of national government, That's not new because, of course, they want to keep power, but that's part of the capacity building. And of course, the importance of also the imperative of building local and national capacities. Note, over the past so many years, we keep on telling, let's build local capacities. Let's build local capacities. I pointed out, no, let's also build national capacities because people at the national level also need a lot of capacity building. Okay. And of course, one major issue in federalism today is about the lack of awareness. Is it something new? That's why we always tell them it is not new, because if we relate it to this ongoing discourse of decentralization and devolution, it will actually build upon, it will push the envelope. But of course, not to be so romantic about it, this whole issue of fear of elite capture, entrenchment of dynasties, which has been there for some time. That's something also that we can mention. But of course, when we talk about decentralization and devolution and even federalism, you don't only transfer powers, but underscore, bold-faced, promote accountabilities as well. At the lowest level of subsidiarity, we promote accountabilities. Now, then I was told, I was advised by Carol and Soren. Can you talk about? And these are my last three slides. Is it really in the front burner? Yes, we have a number of officials, and this is just a cursory. Okay, definitely, I'm not campaigning for anybody at this. But one of the presidential candidates talk about budget reform for village empowerment. His name is Senator Lacson. He's also pushed for empowerment. Of course, Vice President Lenny Robredo talk about the need to institutionalize citizen participation through the People's Council, and that is something that her husband, who used to be the mayor of Naga City and used to be Minister of Local Government himself, has been putting up, including the so-called bottom-up budgeting. And another mayor who's also running for president, his name is Mayor Isko Moreno of Manila, has also talked about the importance of autonomy for local governments. Point difference in the upcoming elections, yes, it's part of the discourse, but unfortunately not very much part of that central. My good friend, his name is Edmund Tayo, who's really a very brilliant fellow, has pointed that unfortunately the whole Mandanas decision, which is initiated all this, is not really very much part of the platforms of many of our government. That's why part of our job is here to push them and say, hey, what do you think about the Mandanas Garcia decision, wherein it transfers powers and authorities to more finances to the local level, but equally important, is that enough? Maybe the money might not be enough. What is the process of devolution? Okay, so revisiting the key messages, I think, as we said earlier, recent events have shown that the discourse of devolution is alive and well in the Philippine administrative system. If properly implemented, it can build a federal form of government, will build upon this. And as I mentioned, it can be put in a continuum from deconcentration, administrative decentralization, to even separation. But not in the middle, but the maximum kind of decentralization, I believe, at least Philippine context, is federalism. But let me mention, not all federal systems are indeed as decentralized, but there are many as decentralized. Many of you around the room are more experts around this. And I think we have learned a lot of lessons over the past 30 years. And equally important, it has to be located within the devolution process. I already mentioned, it's there to bring about development and to politico-administrative conflict to address Mindanao. And right now we have the BARM, the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region, and it's de facto, I think, a state. We can talk about that later on, but I think we can learn from that. I'm from the Cordilleras up north, no? And in our constitution, it also talks about a regional government, and it can be a mechanism to really strengthen local governments. And indeed, for many of us, I think it's a logical next step to devolution. I'd like to thank you for this opportunity, and perhaps a lot of points to discuss with you around the table. And I'm grateful. Thank you very much for this opportunity to Hans Seidel Foundation and to colleagues around the table. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you very much, Professor Brillantes, for your presentation. And it was very nice to see how vividly engaged you are in this federalization discussion and how you are able to bring together so many aspects. And I think you've already given me the perfect introduction, because we are now going to have a Q&A session, and I already see questions in the Q&A box that relate to your presentation, and I think also to the challenges that the Philippines are confronted with at the moment. And I would like to invite you, our audience, there are so many people that are asking questions, to just put them in the Q&A box, and we will pick them up immediately. Let me maybe quickly open the discussion with one question in relation to one of your last points that you made, and that is in reference to the presidential elections. The Philippines are going to have the next presidential elections on the 9th of May, and maybe also for our global audience that maybe not so familiar with the Philippine politics and the Philippine case, it's important to know that outgoing President Duterte's, one of his main campaign promises in 2016 when he was elected was to federalize. And now you've explained very well that this has come to a halt, or you said it was what expression do you use, on the back? Yes, exactly, on the back burner is what you said. And at the same time, you've also shown us now campaign promises of other candidates for the presidential elections of 2022 who talk about decentralization and devolution, but they do not use the word federalism in their campaign. And maybe you can explain a little bit, why has federalism, it's been so prominent in the presidential elections of 2016, and now it's not, the term federalism is not very prominent anymore now. Can you explain a little bit what happened to the federalism discussion and where the Philippines stand on it at the moment?
Thank you so much, Thea. You know what? It has been politicized. At one point, it was equated with the government, okay, with the government of President Duterte, because he ran under the platform of PDP Laban, and the platform PDP Laban, federalism is one, okay. But however, there has been some problems within the PDP Laban, Partido Democrático Pilipinas Laban, which means to fight, of President Duterte, of which was founded by Senator Nenen Pimentel. They've had some problems there, and the party has been essentially split. So together with it, the whole idea of federalism. So now they didn't talk about it. In fact, one of our senatorial candidates, his name is Governor. He's a very good friend, but you know, I'm a bit rattled. He talked about how some of these were hijacked. Lutz Barbo, a very brilliant governor, is running for senator, and said some of the things were hijacked by that. So in one sense, since it was politicized, if you equate federalism with Duterte, that can be a problem. So that's why they pulled back. But as I mentioned, I think it's important for us, like us around the table, let's focus on federalism as an instrument for empowerment, as an instrument for settling the conflict in Mindanao, regardless of who it is. So it remains a politico-administrative mechanism to address these problems. But since it's elections and anything can happen during elections, this was highly politicized, so that's what it does. But in spite of the fact that it's in the back burner, in fact, he constituted a constitutional commission, and a number of our friends, Julio Tihanki and Montayo, they were all part of that, and they actually came up with the constitution. But because of the intervention of quote unquote political partisanship, it's been shunted aside. But in spite of that, the struggle for empowerment continues. The advocacy for empowerment continues. And you did mention that it was included in some of our presidential candidates. They didn't talk about federalism. In fact, they didn't talk about devolution, but they talk about the importance of empowerment. And that can be a very, very good vehicle, no? For vessel for building again, reigniting, if you may, the whole discourse on decentralization, devolution, and eventually federalism. But we have to handle it in a very ginger way because, you know, as I said, it was caught in partisan politics.
Thank you. I would like to pick up on one other aspect that you've mentioned a few times, and that is the Bangsamoro autonomous region in Mindanao. You explained, maybe for our international audience, maybe we can explain a little bit more what the context is there. You have mentioned that, I mean, federalism in the context of the Philippines can be an instrument to address the conflict, and at the same time, with the establishment of the Bangsamoro autonomous region in Mindanao, we also have an example where the Philippines went further than just decentralization, just the system that you were describing before, but actually having an autonomous region with also powers on the regional level. Can you maybe explain a little bit what the context is? And maybe also, we know that the Bangsamoro region is at the moment still in a transition phase. What could be lessons that can be learned from that process for the federalizing process for the rest of the country, in your opinion?
Thank you. Well, at one point, some of you might know that the Philippines imposed a martial law in 1972 by Mr. Marcos, who set up a very, very centralized government called dictatorship. And one of the reasons why it was set up was he calls it to address the rebellion. And one area of rebellion was in Mindanao. Okay, so he thought that martial law did it. And since then, the quote unquote the conflict in Mindanao continues. So there have been a number of politico-administrative mechanisms, including at one point Marcos came up with Presidential Decree 1618. I remember this clearly because I was even part of that movement. And Marcos came up with his own local government code. Then when other presidents came, they got the zone of peace, freedom, and neutrality. Then you have the arm, etc., etc. So many politico-administrative remedies. My friend, his name is Macapado Muslim, is really an expert here, but he did a great dissertation together with another good friend who did this. And we continue to search for appropriate mechanisms. Now we've really hit BARM, the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region for Muslim Mindanao. And it's essentially, if you look at it, the ministers, it's within the context of really a state. I think it's almost a de facto state. But again, we have to continue addressing the national-local relation because you can have the institutions there. But at the end of the day, in terms of real implementation, even there, we had a forum recently with some BARM people, and some provinces say, you know what, and this was even before, if you establish this Muslim autonomous region, but if the subnational, the provinces are still beholden, if you just put another layer that would centralize it, forget it. They have to really experience genuine autonomy. So the debate continues. But in terms of structure, it is there. Because I must mention, historically, in the southern part of the Philippines, we've had attempts at separatism. We had what we call the Mindanao independence movement. There was a movement, they even came up with their own what they call Mindanao dollar. They really wanted to separate and said, wait a minute, Mindanao, Sulu, Palawan, they wanted to separate. But we said, wait a minute, you don't have to separate. This can be addressed through a politico-administrative mechanism through a regional government. Now, hey, it can be addressed through a real, genuine federal government. And that's why I said the federalism can be, and many people always says that it can be used to address the conflict in Mindanao. And I'm happy about what's happening in BARM, but of course, we're not out of the woods yet. The debate continues. Like I said, I was in a forum about 2 weeks ago, I don't know, or a month ago, and it continues because some of the governors say, if it's just going to be another level of centralization, forget it. We don't want any part of it. So it's all about sharing of power. And equally important, if I might be a little romantic, it's also about trust. Something that, as you know, not only in the Philippines, but in many, many countries today, trust continues to be one thing in governance in general.
Maybe in relation to that, we do have a question from the audience that has to do with this debate that has been going on for such a long time. And you also say, it's not something new. It's not something, federalism is not something that only came up in the 2016 election campaign. It's been discussed since the 70s or even earlier. And one person asks why it is so hard for the Philippines to actually move forward with federalism, whether or not there are cultural constraints or just, she calls it a plain power struggle between the national and the local level. What would you say to that?
Well, I will not romanticize. Certainly. I mean, all of us around the room know that at the end of the day, politics is all about power. But question is, how does one share power? And question is, how does one transfer powers where everybody benefits? It sounds so romantic. But at the same time, I think over the past so many years, it has been, I would, or beyond, it sounds so hackneyed, politicized. But more importantly, I think it has been misunderstood. I think if we understand federalism within the context of people empowerment, within the context of participation, I think people do it because we have had a local government code, which I must say, it was passed in 1992, was really a great piece of legislation. And our thousands of local governments around the country are really enjoying this, the autonomy. And equally important, asserting their authority. And equally important, winning, because they went to the Supreme Court, led by Senator Pimentel, led by Governor Mandanas, led by Governor Garcia, and they finally won. But now that we are there, they're talking about the importance of quote unquote implementing full devolution. We're beginning to say, yes, sure, we might have enough resources, changing the mindset. So now we have people at the national government saying, okay, if it is yours, we'll give you everything. Oops, excuse me. Because, that kind of thing. Okay, national government say, well, since you have the Mandanas decision, we'll transfer all the powers to, all the functions to you. And if they do that, you know what, they might end up a shortchange again. And this was exactly the discussion in 1992. I remember so clearly that we were talking about that, the so-called absorptive capacities. You know, this notion of downloading, this notion of load shedding. National government says, okay, if we can't do it, we'll give it to you and let me see if you can do it. That's the kind of mind shift I think that we should avoid. Sometimes it's not either or, it's us together in the ship, because if the ship sinks, all of us sink. It's not only people in first class, it's not only people in the economy, the entire ship sinks. So how does one promote the mindset that we are in this boat together? Okay.
And how is that?
Well, like I said, that's why we were attending the continuous dialogue between and among local governments. Like I said, it's not we're not really romanticized. I've said that a million times, because hey, we're not starting new. We have the local government code, 1992. We have a lot of good and best practices. My shelf is full of outstanding innovations in local governments. It's called the Galing Po program. And you know what? Again, I don't want to romanticize them. We have a lot of good local governments out there. The pandemic has shown it. Of course, we have a lot of local officials that also did not step up to the plate. But like I said, it's like looking at the glass as half empty and half full. I guess I'm just an optimist in that sense. But what it has brought to fore, though, and again, what it has brought to fore is the pandemic. At one point, when we decentralized, we moved from highly centralized all the way down to full decentralization. And we're saying, maybe we overdid it. Is it now time for us to re-examine it? And that's what I said. If we do federalism, maybe we can now go back a little to the pendulum, and maybe an opportunity to learn from the experience of devolution, and equally important, incorporate that as we design federalism. That's why we talk about the importance of clear delineation of functions, powers, and responsibilities, and also the transfer of enough resources to them, taking into consideration absorptive capacities, and taking into consideration the role of national government to quote unquote continue capacity building. Because national government offices have a lot of, will certainly not lose their functions under federal structure. As a matter of fact, as you know, in this whole paradigm of reinventing government, you're talking about steering, but not rowing. Let them row, but not steer. So the job of national is really to look at the global issues. Unfortunately, and that is really the step back in national government. Many of our national government officials continue to row. They go down to the lowest level possible. Things that can be done at the lowest level possible, they still do it. Conditional grants, etc. So letting us all appreciate this whole notion of subsidiarity. I mean, we learned that, of course, from this whole notion of you guys in terms of the importance of subsidiarity. But question, the elephant in the room, at the end of the day, it's all about power. And I think the question that you said the person raises, hey, we might have dynasties. Are we not really strengthening the local elites? We are, but we're also strengthening, looking at pushing the envelope. It's also an opportunity for us to strengthen, if you may, accountabilities. And I saw a question there that talks about the role of civil society. Soren mentions that. Yes, I'm glad. Thank you, Soren, for mentioning that. Because in the local government code, we really encourage people participation. It almost sounds like an oxymoron, because in our local development councils, 1/4 of which is allocated to the NGOs and POs. And we have a very, very vibrant civil society here. And I know this, we've traveled around the country many times since 1992, very, very strong organization. And even as we speak now, you have many good civil society groups that are really engaging them in politics and engaging in governance. And I think that's what it is. Point, the instrument is there. Point, the policy is there. Point, how do we really fully implement it? But at the end of the day, as I said, sometimes the elephant in the room, it can be hijacked. But that's the way life is, I mean, you have these opportunities for everybody, but it's really a question of assertion, perhaps, authority, but equally important, how, as Soren pointed out, the role of civil society. And there are a lot of good civil society groups out there, I must say.
If we've already addressed the role of the civil society, maybe you could also say something about international actors, the geopolitical situation do international actors play a role in the federalism debate in the Philippines?
Well, yes, I mean, definitely. I mean, in terms of models, in terms of seeing how it works, in terms of learning what does not work. Like I said, we're not romanticizing decentralization. I just happened to attend this Committee of Experts meeting at the United Nations, and exactly, hey, we have, you know this much more than I. There are many federal structures in the world that are not as decentralized as others. But given the Philippine context, hey, it can work for us. So yes, learning from others and bringing in experts, or we conduct what we call men's study tours, or participating in, you're familiar, of course, with this group called the Forum for Federations also, learning from each other. I think that's very, very important. I think that's why we are around the room to talk about this. But after having said this, at the end of the day, we design it ourselves. Because at the end of the day, it's us who are left holding the bag. But certainly within the context of this notion called globalization, this thinking global yet acting local. And that's, for me, is what federalism is about. We cannot be isolated from the rest of the world. And I must say, I've seen how some local governments are being more empowered than others. Local governments are able to enter into agreements with others. And at one point, if it's a very, very highly centralized government, local governments can do that because they have to go to national government. But is it possible for them to have more authorities? I think it's possible. And I think if you have highly autonomous federal states, it's possible. But of course, you have also some failures out there. I mean, I wouldn't say it's a failure, but how sometimes the lack of coordination from the national government. I think that a good example would be what happened in the United States with the very federal structure. But when the pandemic came, everybody had their own strategies, and that was quite problematic, as you know. So national government provides the overall framework, local governments implement it according to their respective situation. And I must say, over the past pandemic, we've seen local governments who really stepped up to the plate and dared to step up to national government, because national government had its own policies. But one local government said, wait a minute, no, we'll do it on our own. And they did, and they were proven right. For instance, in the conduct of testing in relation to COVID. National government said, no, you cannot set up your laboratories because we still have to accredit them. The local government said, forget you. They went ahead and tested. And national government came in later and said, we accredit you. Thanks, but no thanks, but we're already accredited by you guys. So we have this kind of mindset. And that's the kind of mindset, I think, for development-oriented local governments. And we're about to have our elections in a few weeks. And this is the kind of local officials we're talking. Somebody who is willing to be part of this whole discourse, thinking global, but acting local. Localization.
There is also a question, if we're talking about what the reasons are as to why the federalization process is not moving forward. One question links it, or is related to the political structure, the government structure, and asks whether actually the presidential system and the strong concentration of powers with the president could actually be a hindrance for reform, and whether maybe a parliamentary system could be more in favor of reform. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, well, yes, the Constitutional Commission that was constituted by the president actually pushed for. I think we should deconstruct the debate from federal unitary and presidential parliamentary. No, so it could be a different. It could be presidential. It could be federal presidential, because other parts of the world, or it could be unitary parliamentary. But what in response to your question, and I read the debates in the Constitutional Commission, they really proposed for a federal parliamentary, because you're so right in terms of accountabilities. No, it's very, very important, because at one point the Philippines has always, let's face it, the Philippines has always had a strong president, and experience has shown that. We wrote a book on who determines what. Does the president determine the institution, or does the institution determine the president? And in our case, we say it's the personality of the president that determines the institution. And I think if we go to that kind of more highly accountable structure, then it could move in that direction. So yes, Dr. Abueva, one of the brightest minds in the Philippines, and he just passed on, but has always advocated for a unit, for a presidential parliamentary form. In fact, we came up, I was one of his research assistants at one point, we came up with a draft constitution. This has been engaged, this has been studied by a number of scholars with help from international community such as yourselves. Point is, how do we let people understand it? So information dissemination, deconstructing the notion that, hey, it's not new, the fear of the unknown, but it's not unknown. Because if we build on what we have, it could work out. Because like everybody around the room, like many countries, the search for the appropriate politico-administrative machinery comes in. Whether it will come next 10 years or not. Because we've been talking federalism formally since 1979. Formally, no, since 1979. But of course, even at the University of the Philippines, where I'm from, we were talking about that already before. If you locate it within the context of empowerment, democratization, participation. Local governments is a very, very good vessel for that. And if you push the envelope further, maybe federalism will even do that. Because you now have and I mentioned the word, highly autonomous states that will compete among each other, rather than everything always being done in Imperial Manila.
There is a question that relates to an aspect that we have not talked about at all yet today, and that is about equal rights between Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people in the Philippines. You already have a thought on that. The question is, how can federalism make sure that equal rights can be guaranteed for both Indigenous and non-Indigenous groups in the Philippines?
I guess there are really no guarantees, but it's also up to them and up to the advocates for such. In the Philippines today, we have what's called the, among others, the party list system. Even at the local government, you have the specific allocation for the marginalized sector, and obviously the indigenous peoples are part of that, and they have organized themselves. We have candidates, as a matter of fact, right now running for senator from the indigenous peoples. Question: do they have a constituency? Of course, they have a constituency. Question: are we able to mobilize a constituency? That's where it comes in. But we can learn from. One of my most I really admire, for instance, the indigenous peoples in Australia, for instance. Isn't it when you attend a meeting in Australia, for instance, they always begin by recognizing the rights of the indigenous people who were here even before us. And that's the kind of thing, it's really a change of mindset. There's a movement in the United Nations now talks about, at the end of the day, it's really our mindsets that really gets in the way. You can have the best structures, the best constitution, but if you don't change the mindset, which is within the context of capacity building. So how does one bring that about? Question, you're talking about indigenous peoples. Very, very important. Now, like I said, you have in the Philippines, you have what's called sectoral representatives from the indigenous people, and you are so right. They have as much right as everybody. No? So how do we, that would be the quote unquote, the voice, giving them a voice. But if we recognize that these guys were here even before us, the way the Australians have recognized, they're really, that's why they're called indigenous people. But you don't have to, even the United States, look what's happened there with the indigenous peoples, even in other parts of the world, no? So it's really a whole continuing discourse, and that's also, by the way, included in the SDGs. No? So in one sense, you're right about providing voice to them. We provide the mechanism, but equally important, how do we encourage their own assertion for their rights? Like I said, we have senators right now who are running from the indigenous people. We have one senator, his name is Mr. Bagilat. He's from up north, which I think is great. Somebody to give a voice. We have also some Muslim brothers and sisters who are running for the Senate. I think that's great. Question: will they have the constituency? Question: will we be able to get the votes? Well, that's something that we have to discuss, because like I said, the elephant in the room, sometimes there's too much partisan politics in the Philippines, because a lot of it is also due to highly personalistic politics in our country. But hey, it's all part of our evolution. We have sometimes, my friends say, we have a number of our institutions are quite advanced, but we have to catch up in terms of implementing them. But it's not new, because even other systems have similar issues and concerns about the problem of quote unquote implementation, which is a very, very public administration concern.
There actually is a question on personality-based politics from the audience as well. And maybe in this regard, you also wrote in your paper that back in 2018, I don't know if it has changed since then, but only 37% of the population actually supported federalism. And you were talking a lot about capacity building, about educating people. At the same time, this person asks, how successful could federalism actually be when voters have to deal with disinformation and so much, and like disinformation on how they get their information with regards to social media, etc., but also personality-based politics, and that also has to do with the presidential system, I assume.
Well, you're right. The first Nobel Prize winner, her name is Maria Ressa. No? I thought she is such a brilliant woman. She herself is very, very aware about this information use of social media. So it's all about being aware of what's going on and being critical, sifting through. Because you and I mean, come on, we see a lot of disinformation out there. And I think that's what we around the room, I have a number of colleagues around the table who are also from different universities. And I keep on telling them, you might be part of the intellectual elite, but that's our job, to look always at the question behind the question, not just accept things hook, line, and sinker. And I think if we know the game, but after having said that, it's a given. Personality politics, it's a given. Somebody asked the mature voters. Well, I must say, we should be moving in that direction. When our people will really be, when we, myself included, will really be voting according to ideology rather than personality. But if you look at it, we're not at that level yet, because people shift the political parties. So I guess this whole notion of federalism should not really be seen as one. It's really part of an entire menu, if you may, of public sector reform. We're talking about electoral reform. We're talking about party reform. And I know our German colleagues around the table have been, and of course, Hans said that have been supporting public sector reform, not only decentralization, party sector. It's all that, no? But we have to move in that direction and appropriately contextualized. We're not saying, hey, it works for Germany, it works for, it will work for. Of course not. We look at those and then appropriately contextualize it. And I think we're ready for that. In fact, we've been ready for some time. But of course, like I said, I don't want to romanticize it. We have problems. I'll be the first to admit we have a lot of problems. But hey, we also have a lot of good practices. That's why I pointed out our program on successful local governments. It's so inspiring to see good local governments step up to the plate. That's why in my job, when I was a dean of the University of the Philippines, we continue to bring people to your university in Freiburg. We brought them to DSE, the Deutsche Stiftung Entwicklung, or we went to Germany, to Australia, learning about how do they share resources. But equally important, how have they asserted themselves in terms of organizing the leagues of provinces, leagues of cities. It is a journey. It will not happen overnight. We know this, and it will happen in our lifetime, hopefully. But at least we're planting the seeds, and I think a major seed that has been planted was our local government code, the very, 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 very powerful local government code of 1992. It's been there. It's not a total failure, as some of our economists would say. It's not a total failure, and it's not yet a total success. But hey, let's build on that.
There are quite a lot of questions exactly about what you just talking about, and that is about constitutional reform.
Yeah, exactly.
You also write in your paper that people are quite opposed, or maybe even afraid, from engaging in reform processes to change the constitution. Why is that? Why are people rather opposed to constitutional change? And also, is this opposition against constitutional reform one of the main reasons why the federalism debate is stuck?
Stuck, or maybe placed in the back burner. The way I look at it, we're very highly partisan. And constitutional reform, you are so right. I mean, come on, all of us were talking about the need for reform. We've developed a framework for that. But equally important, it's always been equated, it's this lack of trust, if you may. Not only in, as you know, it's really a problem in governance in general, lack of trust. Because, hey, if there's constitutional reform, what is his or what is her motivation? To extend her term, to extend his term. And that has always been it. But guess what? That's exactly what Marcos did in 1972. He came up with his own constitution saying that, hey, it's martial law to address the conflict, to reform society. But at the end of the day, he extended his term. So that's where the trust in government has really gone down. And of course, through so many of our presidents, many of them talked about constitutional reform, no? But one president who didn't want was tempted, was offered constitutional reform was Fidel Ramos, but he said, no, I will not, I'll stick to my 6-year term, okay? And then the other presidents talk about that. So I guess in one sense, we always read motives into this. We read motives into this. Like I said, yes, we do need constitutional reform. We do need party reform. Our parties in the Philippines are not exactly something to boast of. You know, people shift parties here like they shift jackets, you know, but yeah. You know, so when will we need to have very ideological parties. That's why at one point Senator Pimentel set up PDP Laban. It was ideological if you may. And one particular part of the ideology set up a federal form of government. And that's what, and when President Duterte ran under that, okay, we'll set up federal form. We'll advocate for federal government, which was good in the beginning. Unfortunately, as they moved on, there was schisms in the party, and even the PDP Laban itself has become quite divided. But now you have the so-called the original PDP and others who are using the party as a simple mechanism to capture power. So in one sense, it's kind of embarrassing. In one sense, we use our political parties for ideological, personal politics, which is really the way things are done here. But it need not end there. So like I said, Thea, it's really something that's really part of a journey. And that's, I think, how we should understand all this. It's not one moment in time, but it really should be seen. Come on, Jose Rizal talked about federalism for a long time ago, our national hero. Because eventually we'll move to that. No? I guess I'm being quite almost naively optimistic, but guys, we have to be optimistic here. Yeah, quite naive, but realistically naive, if you may.
So about that optimism, maybe then a question from a rather pessimist question, actually, to counter that. A person asked, and I quote, that some say that federalism will only work in rich countries and never in developing countries like the Philippines. Can you give an example of where what kind of role models the Philippines actually can pick up on and could be of use as a template?
Well, I would not say template, but we look at others. I'm familiar, of course, with Malaysia. Okay, it's a federal structure, but quite highly centralized. I'm familiar with India. You know, we're familiar with South Africa. There are different models, and we learn from them. Let's say we pick from them. As a matter of fact, if I might say, I'm part now of it's called the Eastern Region Organization for Public Administration, EROPA, and we're having precisely a panel on this, on the federal models. And yes, we'll look at others. It will be held in Nepal virtually. Nepal itself has adopted the federal form of government, I think, over the past 5 years. And they're looking at that. I've been to Nepal to talk about our own experience on advocacy federalism. So let's look at that, no? And how is it done? But at the end of the day, it's all about defining who's responsible for what, agreeing to what, and focusing on our vision. In our framework, we talk about the importance of focusing on our vision. In the Philippines, all of us around the room talk about the SDGs, but equally important, the vision of, we call it the Ambition Natin 2040, Ambition Natin 2040. Where do we want to go in 2040? And let's move forward. In spite of the changes in government, let's focus on that vision. I'm sorry to tell you if I sound so romantic, but it can be done. No, it can be done. It must be done. Hey, we have no choice. It should be done because this is not the kind of world we would like to live our children in. And that is, I think, what federalism can bring. A more equitable society, not only for the vulnerable, like the indigenous peoples, for instance, but equally important for the next generation. It can and should also be crafted within the context of intergenerational equity. So it sounds romantic, but hey, it can be done. That's why you have SDGs. People say SDGs is romantic. No, it can be. That's why we have some indicators. That's why we have a lot of, come on, I have volumes and volumes of books on federalism here. We've been studying that. No? But at the same time, as we say in the Philippines, kailangan maglanding. It has to be implemented. How do we do it? Appropriate contextualization. And that's what praxis is all about. Praxis, theory and practice. Not all theory, not all practice. But let's not lose sight of our ideology, which is people empowerment. Whether it's federalism, whether it's decentralization, that's fine. And I think if we go federalism, we'll really be pushing the envelope to maximum people empowerment.
We are almost running out of time, and I would like to take the liberty of asking one last question, and that is a little bit to summarize, because on the one hand, you say in the Philippines, a lot is already there. We have so much to build on for moving towards a more federal structures. We actually have so much. And at the same time, you talk a lot about reform, that there is reform required. So what are the key issues that you think for moving forward would have to be addressed first?
That's a great question, because as I said, it's very, and as was mentioned at the beginning by Stefan, the moment is there. We have this Mindanao Supreme Court decision. So everybody now is looking at the local government, something that we have almost forgotten. And it's time for us to revisit this whole issue of power sharing between and among ourselves. It's time for us to really push the envelope in terms of communication, in terms of understanding, in terms of defining who is responsible for what. So I think that the moment is there. But of course, like I said, we're not kidding ourselves when it's happening overnight. That's why part of it will be also to be asking questions to all our candidates, people who are running for presidency. And like I said, my good friend Ed Montayo said, I was a bit disappointed because not many of them are familiar with this Mandana's decision. That's how it has been. But at the end of the day, so a lot of personal politics. But in spite of that, if you talk about ideology, if you talk about platform, what is your? And there's a question here by Sorel in terms of what specific and concrete federalism proposals are, and if they need further debate. Yes, a lot of concrete proposals out there. Asking them, we already have concrete proposals. How many regions should there be? We talk about the importance of doing an inventory of this region should be rich in mining. This region, although that's not this region will be rich in fisheries. You know, the kind of thing. What is the comparative advantage of that region? But part of our overall development plan. And yes, our National Economic Development Authority has such plans already. Hopefully, it will not be interrupted again. And like I said, unfortunately, we have a lot of partisan politics. And we still have quite a ways to go in terms of maturing political system. But hey, that's the way things are, as far as I'm concerned. But definitely, we are not losing sight of our vision. And the vision is really quote-unquote development. For whom? For the mostly, especially the vulnerable, including the indigenous people. And the vision is equity, not only for the vulnerable, as defined by SDGs, but equally important for the next generation. We want to be good ancestors. We don't want the next generation to be telling these guys didn't take care of us. And I think within the context of public sector reform, including not only federalism, including federalism, it can and must be done. That's why we have an opportunity now to really challenge all these guys running for public office. What are your concrete proposals for public sector reform? Not only changing structures, but changing mindsets as well.
Thank you very, very much, Professor Brillantes, for this interesting presentation, but also for answering all of these questions and giving us an insight on the current debates, but also on your optimism and your views of how to move forward. And I see there are so many questions still that have not been answered yet, and that also shows that there is a debate, and unfortunately we don't have time to address these questions right now, but I am sure that there will be other moments where we can continue these discussions, and I am already looking forward to that. So thank you very, very much, Alex, for being here, for participating, and also thank you very much to the audience for engaging in the discussion, for asking so many questions. I'm very sorry again that we didn't get to address all of them. I think it's going to give us quite a good background also to continue following the presidential campaigns and the debates, and also then the actual elections that will take place in 9th of May. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what's happening in the Philippines in that regard. So I'm concluding this session. Thank you very much. It was our second session of 2022, and our next session of Turn on Federalism is going to take place in June. You will hear about it again via our usual channels. And yeah, until then, depending on where you are, I wish you a very good night or good evening or good morning or good afternoon, and see you next time. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.